So welcome to Launchpad, everyone. Launchpad's Flight Path podcast that we're doing once a month. I'm here with Launchpad co-founder Dave Thomas. Dave, tell us a little bit about you and your background and what created your desire to co-found Launchpad with Jeremy, and then we'll launch into some questions.
Okay, sounds good. So Jeremy and I were in a business doing management consulting called iOctane, which had a number of different lives, the last of which was focused around process improvement in large companies. And the story goes that Jeremy was working with a team back at Launchpad trying to sell a whole bunch of clients, and I was working at Telstra doing a big consulting gig around streamlining their business delivery processes. And it was kind of a major project. I was spending a lot of money, and I had the title of change manager, which is an oxymoron at the best of times, but at Telstra it was an uphill battle because they can't manage anything. So really it was around selling the project internally. And I would have to say after 10 months, we achieved pretty much nothing. Although Telstra spent a lot of money. And I came back out of that gig to Jeremy and said, look, I don't want to do this anymore. At the end of the day, we earned a lot of money, but if you're not really achieving much with corporates, it's not particularly interesting.
Yeah.
So we, at that stage, Jeremy and the team had not been successful in closing out the deals. So we decided, you know what, this is just not working for us. So we literally that day, I remember saying to Jeremy, we have to retrench the staff. We're going to completely reinvent this business. And it starts with all our consulting staff who are just sitting on the bench at that stage. We have to retrench them. So I literally got up, walked out, marched them in, and we retrenched them all.
Ouch.
Hardest thing we've ever done. And here's the weird thing. At the end of it, they kept coming back and wanting to help us set up Launchpad. And they bought us presents. They bought us 2 chairs, one that says boss and the other one that says the other boss.
Are they the chairs that are sitting on the forest floor?
And they were from our staff,
right?
Because I think at the end of the day, they kind of appreciated that we genuinely wanted them to be okay. We cared about them. And that was kind of nice. In a weird sort of way. So we took the serviced office that we were developing or we were running on the side and put together our management consulting, and that's what we called Launchpad in 122. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of evolved from there. Once we got that business up and running, we pretty rapidly realised that it was unsustainable.
Yeah.
So it was 700 square metres, and that's not enough space to pay salaries. You can run as a business, but you can't run it as a co-working space.
Yeah.
And that sort of started our whole journey around how the hell do you make these things work? Because at that stage, there were a few co-working spaces being created, the hub of which was the kind of banner leader there.
Yeah.
And we were going, how the hell do they even make a living out of that? How on earth do they make that work?
Yeah.
And so we started drilling into it and asking the question, how does the business model work? And more importantly, how can we make it work for ourselves? So at that point, we realised we have to have more space.
Yeah.
We have to make it bigger. So the building next door, which became 132, became available. We approached the owners, Criminal Properties, and Gus, who's a really lovely guy, kind of warmed to us. And he said, look, I'll hook you up with the managing director, the CEO, Michael. And Michael took one look at us and said, not a hope in hell are you guys going to get hold of my building. He said, you are just too risky. What you're doing is just too out there. We just like traditional,
safe bets,
safe people who will just pay the rent, and you guys ain't it. So we almost bought a building out at Mitcham, really cool building actually. Glad we didn't buy it at the end. Missed out on it. That whole process took about 6 months. And during that time, we realised that the 132 building hadn't been sold, hadn't been rented. And we went back to Gus and said, no, this building hadn't been rented. And he went, yep. And I said, out of interest, how's safe, reliable working for you? And he said, I'll go back to Michael and we'll see if we can do a deal. And we did the deal. So in the end, we actually got the place a bit cheaper than we originally wanted. It still cost us a lot of money because you have to fit it out. We got an investor on board. That was mixed. I think the expectations of the investor and the expectations of us were different.
Yeah.
In the end, we were fortunate Jeremy could buy him out. During that period of time as well, the building at the end between two buildings, so what now Albert, became available. We subleased a little bit of that, and that kind of completed the space. From a business model perspective, there's enough capacity there now to fund the team and generate a healthy profit out of it.
Yeah.
So the business model works. I mean, costs have gone up, but we've still managed to make that kind of work. So I think it's been an interesting journey. Have we made money out of it? Yeah, we've certainly paid everything. Does Jeremy want to see a healthy return from his investment? Absolutely. And we need to work towards that. How long have we got the buildings? I think Cremorne Properties will probably bulldoze the buildings, in about somewhere between 5 and 10 years' time. So we have more than enough time to do something really interesting and creative and worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, what one piece of news have you most been excited about this week?
One piece of news.
One piece of news that you've heard about this week that has excited you in some way, shape, or form.
Apart from Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister of England,
is he the white one? Like the really, really white one, like the albino one?
Yes.
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 No offense if there's any.
Yes, it
people
completes
listening that offended, but
the triumvirate of bad prime ministers and heads of state. Look, probably the one thing that I think has resonated with me is the realisation we're actually in a downturn, a recession that's just not been named, which kind of crystallises for me the reality of where we're up to in the economy at the moment.
yeah.
It's been obvious for a while that we're heading in that direction, and now it's all becoming clear. It's only a matter of time before the government announce it formally.
Well,
they won't be able to hide because at some point the data kind of comes out.
They've kind of done it with this 5-year stimulus package disguised as a tax cut.
Well, that's the hope they could avoid it, right?
Yeah.
But that hasn't worked. So at some point that's going to come out. I think that for me, look, there's nothing wrong with a downturn versus an upturn. It's just you can always make things work in a downturn and you can always make things work in an upturn. The main thing is to realise what's actually going on and then take the right action. Yeah.
Yes, I would second that. Your proudest professional or personal accomplishment?
That's a good question. I think starting Launchpad was a lot of fun. I've done 3 startups now. And I think Launchpad has been the most fun. I'm fortunate. I earned a lot of money out of the previous businesses I've started, and I'm not rich, but
just to clarify, I've
got enough. I've got enough that I don't have to earn all that much to kind of keep my head above water, and that's fortunate. So that lets me, with my wife's blessing, have some fun along the way, and I think that Launchpad's been a really worthwhile thing to do. I've actually enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to stay involved for a while longer yet.
Yep. So tell me, springboarding off that, tell me about a time where you felt very connected to your community. Could be your
So
personal family.
when I did my first startup, so I worked for Hewlett Packard as a researcher, and there were 120 of us in the division. And Hewlett Packard was very much like a family sort of business. Even back then, it was huge, but there was still a kind of strong spirit to it. And we all got retrenched. Dave Packard just decided that software was not the future, and that they should just get rid of all this software stuff in Hewlett Packard, and decided to get rid of 5,000 employees worldwide. Wow. We were on the wrong side of the black line. And so they retrenched us all. And during that first 6 months, we had no money. And Sal and I just bought a house.
Yeah.
So we were relying on the local community in our area a lot. Sal was going to the local church and getting food to put on the table. And we were, lucky that the people kind of helped us out through that period. And we got through it. But I think the spirit and generosity of people just makes you feel good.
Yeah.
People who are willing to help you because you're trying to do something worthwhile. And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about something interesting that you've watched, read, or listened to in the past week.
That's a good question. So I've been watching Love, Sex and Robots on Netflix, which is kind of Black Mirror but in cartoons.
I have not watched it.
It's very cool. So each one is done by a different animator.
That's cool.
And it's dystopian, right? So it's the near future, some of them. And one I really liked was a time loop.
Okay.
So a girl sees a murder and the murderer sees her. And then through the whole sequence is her getting away from him, only for her to be confronted by the murderer, and she kills him only to look out the window and for the murdered person to be looking at her murdering somebody, and the time loop starts again.
That's cool.
So that was very cool. So I've been really enjoying watching it. I like Black Mirror and dystopian type things. I like science fiction is often kind of interesting source of ideas about the future. Far more useful than futurists who only seem to be able to predict the future by looking at the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, everything's pattern, right? Okay. What's the strangest interaction you've had with someone, maybe it was with a futurist, that you didn't know, that led to something unexpected?
I looked at working with Dave Chia is always a bit like that. Dave's a bit of a canary in the coal mine, and he has this frustrating ability to join several dots and leap forward. So working with him about the future of Launchpad and what's happening in the marketplace. In fact, just this morning I was catching up with him and he was spinning my head again. I think that's kind of interesting. I enjoy talking to diverse groups of people and getting them to share things with them that I don't expect. I think that's a really useful thing to do. You never find innovation talking to the same people.
No.
Right? So you've always got to get out there and talk to new people. Dave's useful for me because he's a sounding board. So he'll often have a completely different perspective on things that I don't expect. And I like that. Yeah.
Okay. So one person in the ecosystem in Victoria that you'd most like to get to know.
Ooh.
So the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Look, Dave once mentioned to me that he thought that the most entrepreneurial people in Australia at the moment are our actors. So if you think about it, some of our best exports
Absolutely.
have been the Russell Crowes, the Nicole Kidmans of the world.
Rebel Wilson.
Yeah, and they all come with them kind of a business model.
Yeah.
Right? So they employ people. They employ a whole range of different people, and often they start production companies, and they've been extraordinarily successful brands on the global stage.
Yeah.
And as an export from Australia, they're actually pretty amazingly successful. I think there's a bunch of those people that will be interesting to talk to from that perspective.
Yeah.
What is it about what they do that is so successful? I'm also interested in what's happening over in New Zealand, as you know. So I'm kind of interested that New Zealand has a rocket and we don't have a rocket.
Not yet.
Well, I think the spaceport idea in Adelaide is more about government funding. So I see it as a bit of an academic exercise. Certainly there's no talk of building a rocket. And yet New Zealand now I think has launched 3. So that interests me. So I think those actors who have done well overseas, I think there's a bunch of those, and directors. I think that whole industry is an interesting model about entrepreneurship. So I'm less interested in the fame thing. I'm more interested in how they've been successful despite the obstacles.
Yeah. So what do you think the most interesting thing happening in Australia right now is?
That's a really good question. Australia is an interesting place. To some extent, we're kind of 10 years behind the rest of the world, and that's allowed us to kind of sit back and take notice.
Yeah.
We could so easily have put in place Donald Trump or Boris Johnson. We could have easily have had a buffoon running the country, and we don't. Despite what you lean politically, ScoMo is not a bad person, and I think it could easily have gone down that path. So right now, Australia's kind of an interesting place, and I think that we've got some really interesting opportunities. So that for me, right now, I think that in Australia, we still have a great opportunity to create the Australian century. And I think, despite shifts in people gaming the system, if you look at the alt-right, if you look at highly conservative, movements, that they've figured out how to game the system. They've figured out how to sway public opinion.
Oh, and Antifa's getting there too.
Yeah, so lots of those kind of movements.
Yeah.
And I think they've been, as yet, unsuccessful in Australia to a large extent. And that's a really positive sign. Will it stay that way? Don't know. But I'd like to think that we've got a little bit of luxury of trying to get things straightened out while the rest of the world wakes up. To some extent, Trump being president, it's a bit of a wake-up call in the US. The UK have got to learn the same lesson. And, Brexit, they should just get it over and done with. It's going to be not what people expected. But they've cast a die. They've passed their vote. They're going to do whatever it's required. They should just get on with it and get it done. And then just deal with the consequences of it. And, nothing really bad's going to happen. They're just going to be a bit poorer, and they're just going to be a little bit more isolated. But they're going to create a whole lot of work for a whole lot of people. And, whenever there's cutting back, there's always renewal.
So what do you think humanity's biggest struggle is going to be in the next 5 years and then in the next 10 years?
Oh, look, I don't think it's anything like AI or robotics or automation. every single industrial revolution there has been has always created more than it consumed. So definitely it's going to be painful for people to shift, to change. And as long as there are people willing out there to assist in that and to, kind of smooth it all out, I think that'll be fine. I think there is definitely a challenge for us in changing the fundamental way we measure our success. Humans, by their very nature, consume more than they give.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we consume more resources and we give less back.
Yeah.
So we've got to fundamentally change that way that works. And that ain't going to be something that changes an election, right? It's a generational thing. It's going to require a number of generations to see that through. And I'm very hopeful of the next generation, the millennials that are coming into the workforce now, they will steward the place.
Let's hope.
As long as we can get over this fixation of wealth and possessions. And I'm very hopeful that that the next generation is going to be less interested in stuff and more interested in things that are actually important.
Yeah.
Yeah, my generation, Gen Xers, the end of baby boomers, were so fixated on stuff. And you can understand why. They come from a generation that was the end of the Second World War and stuff was important because they didn't have stuff.
Yeah.
Right? But you don't need more stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that if we can get past that, if we can stop measuring growth as an important aspect of success and start measuring other things that are actually more important.
Yeah.
If we didn't care so much about stuff, there wouldn't actually be a recycling problem because would have solved the packaging problem in the very first place.
Yeah.
Right? Plastics wouldn't be an issue if we weren't generating plastics. Recycling wouldn't be a problem if we didn't generate the packaging problem. So we're so fixated on dealing with symptoms without actually dealing with the root causes.
Yeah.
And
Great.
The older generation, my generation and the boomers will probably not be the people to fix it. And I'm hopeful that, my kids and my grandkids will be the people that will solve that problem. Just got to make sure that we put in place the right frameworks to give them a chance to get on with it.
Okay, so last question, and I always end with this question.
Cool.
If there were no constraints, no resource constraints, no monetary constraints, what would you love to build and why? No technological constraints. You could do anything. What would you build and why?
I'd probably build nothing. I think you need to push on boundaries. Having constraints causes innovation. Having something to push against becomes interesting. You kind of can see that with kids. If you give kids a blank sheet of paper and say, just draw something, right? They go, what? It's a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
But if you give it a bit of a framework and say, well, draw something about the time we went to a beach, right? Then that kind of creates some boundaries for them to push against. You always need to be able to push against something. If you had so much money that anything was possible, then in the end, nothing will be done.
Yeah.
So it's almost axiomatic in that sense.
Yep. Great. So thanks, Dave. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll tune back next month with someone different in our community.
Someone more interesting.
Dave's very interesting. He's just very modest. So if you want to be featured, shoot me a line. If there's anyone specific in the community you actually want us to feature, let us know and we'll do it. So thanks very much.